You know, I've made some choices that I'm stuck with. I'm stuck here. I'm like the dead cat, right? This whole night we've been worrying. There's some dark version of us out there somewhere. What if we're the dark version?
Welcome to Light Channel Action, a show that explores the frequently unnoticed spiritual aspects of your favorite movies and TV series. My name is Henry, and today we'll be talking about the mind-bending 2013 film, Coherence. The first thing we need to talk about when talking about this movie is the comet. The comet is really at the center of this movie. Everything sort of revolves around the comet, like it has its own gravitational pull. They talk about the comet quite a bit at the beginning of the film. It cracks M's cell phone, it's what made the power go out. All the characters assume that once the comet is passed, that they can go back to their normal lives like nothing had ever happened.
Comet.
The comet in the tower?
Comet.
Wheeler's comet.
Yes, thank you.
Comet.
I looked to see if there was any basis in reality for Miller's comet. You might have heard of William Miller, or Millerites. William Miller is basically like the great-grandfather of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Turns out that William Miller predicted the second coming of Christ would occur somewhere between March 1843 and March 1844. Obviously, this didn't happen, but what did happen was a comet with an enormously long tail passed by in March of 1843. At the time, this comet had the longest tail of any known comet all the way up until 1996, so I have seen this referenced as Miller's comet, but it's most commonly referred to as the Great Comet of 1843. So I thought maybe there's something here. Maybe the director is saying something about the comet being related to the second coming of Christ or ascension up into heaven or something like that. But there's also the fact that it's just a great big ball of light in the sky. This movie really plays around with the balance between light and dark. And if you're not aware, light has a huge significance in spirituality and religion. Light is in my channel name for a reason. Many of the spiritual texts I've read have talked about light being the building block of our universe. Ra, who preaches the law of one, states, "The origin of all energy is the action of free will upon love. The nature of all energy is light." Seth, as channeled through Jane Roberts, says, "There is light within darkness. Light has more manifestations than its physical version, so that even when it may not be physically manifested, there is light everywhere. And that light is the source of your physical version and its physical laws." In one of Dolores Cannon's interviews, we're told, "Everything begins with a particle of light. If you could imagine a molecule, you could see a pinpoint of light. Within that source of all that is, the interconnections between particles form a source energy."
ACEUS. Horace, listen, I'll be down at the pyramid. Come on down and join me. We're going to talk about some deity stuff.
You see light as a representation of the divine in many movies and TV shows. Spielberg is especially well known for this. I think this is because light is such an important part of almost every religion. In Christianity, the first thing God did after creating an earth without form was say, "Let there be light." And so began the formation of our existence. Jesus himself said, "I am the light of the world." In the Quran, Muhammad said, "I am from the light of Allah, and everything has been created from my light." Light is also very significant in Jewish mysticism. And then the Hindus even have a huge festival for light. All this to say, light plays a huge role in spirituality and this movie. So going back to William Miller, I could definitely see the comet being representative of a light in the heavens that could be symbolic for ascension. But I also have a theory that the comet could represent mirror matter. In my research, I came across this article called "Comets, a Key to a Parallel Universe." And I thought, wow, this sounds like it could have been inspiration for the movie. The article talks about comets disappearing, but no one knows where they're going. Researchers have found that the expected number of asteroids is far too low to account for the expected number of cometary remnants. Robert Foote of the University of Melbourne speculates that many comets might be made of a new type of matter called mirror matter. The existence of mirror matter would help explain some of the missing aspects of fundamental laws that explain nature. The article says, "In addition to electrons and quarks and photons of light, the universe contains mirror electrons and mirror quarks and mirror photons. These combine to make mirror atoms and mirror matter. So this makes mirror matter a prime candidate to be dark matter, which scientists believe makes up at least 90% of the mass of the universe. They know it's there, they just don't know where." Foote goes on to say, "If I'm right, there is an invisible mirror universe occupying the same space as our universe, complete with mirror galaxies, mirror stars, and perhaps even mirror life." A big part of the reason I think the movie is based on this article is because they also talk about the Tunguska effect, which they specifically reference in the movie. And Foote seems to think that this comet was a space body made of mirror matter, said it perfectly fits the bill. So based on this, I think that in a way, the comet represents exposing this other parallel universe, this mirror of our world. The thing is, it's not just a mirror in one way, it's a mirror in every possible way. So, if there are other realities, how would that work? Well, quantum mechanics does a pretty good job of explaining this. In the film, they talk about the Schrodinger's cat thought experiment.
He talked about this. Do you guys know what Schrodinger's cat is?
I'm allergic.
This thought experiment makes the case that if a cat is placed inside of a box, and they have a 50-50 chance of living or dying, then the cat simultaneously exists as both alive and dead up until the box is opened and the state of the cat is observed. The act of observing the cat is what collapses the probability of the cat either living or dying into one of those probabilities. The characters continue reading from the notes in the book, and they find out about decoherence. They say that decoherence is what keeps the multiple probabilities from interacting or interfering with one another. The double-slit experiment is a much better example of explaining decoherence, though. The double-slit experiment shows what would happen if you took particles of light, photons, and shot them at a barrier with 2 slits in it, and then recorded what happened to those particles on a wall behind that barrier. So what you think would happen with particles when you send them through the slits is that it would come out on the other side lining up with the slits. There would be 2 vertical lines on the wall behind the barrier, just like if you took tennis balls and threw them at a barrier with 2 slits, and recorded where they landed on the wall behind it. But what happened with these particles of light is that they behaved more like waves than particles. With waves, think about what would happen with water when you send it through the 2 slits. The waves coming through the slits would interfere with each other on the other side. So what you see on the wall behind when you throw photons at the 2 slits is what is called an interference pattern. The photons go through the barrier and then interfere with one another, and then the light concentrates in some areas, leaving behind brighter spots. The brighter spots are caused by what's called constructive interference, and the darker spots are caused by what's called destructive interference. This led physicists to the conclusion that light is a wave and not a particle, or light is both a particle and a wave. This brings up the paradox of wave-particle duality. The double-slit experiment gets even weirder though. Instead of photons, they tried it with electrons, which we know for a fact are particles. Now, interference isn't supposed to happen when particles are sent through a double slit. Physicists expected the electrons to go through the barrier, through the 2 slits, and come out on the other side as 2 distinct lines, and not cause interference. But what happened with electrons is that they still created an interference pattern, even though they're particles. So to rule out the chance of them interfering with one another, they decided to send the electrons through one by one. You would assume that there was 0 chance of there being any interference, but nope. I can only imagine that the physicists, when they performed this experiment, were like, what the f-? Then they were like, we have to know what exactly is going on here. We need to see exactly which slit the electrons are going through. So they set up measurement devices at the entrance of the slits to see which slit each electron went through. But after they did this, they saw that the interference pattern disappeared. The electrons started behaving the way that they assumed particles should behave. So it turns out the act of observation literally has an effect on how things behave. Schrödinger only proposed the cat thought experiment in the first place because he thought that the Copenhagen interpretation was ridiculous. He was basically saying that if you took the double-slit experiment and scaled it up to a cat, it's ridiculous to think that it would work. Most people would agree it's utter lunacy to think that a cat in a box under those circumstances is both alive and dead at the same time. Like, that just doesn't make sense. But I think the reason why the double-slit experiment wouldn't work with anything larger than particles is because there's no way to get awareness or observation out of the equation. With things as small as particles, our awareness obviously isn't always there, and it's only our awareness and observation that causes things to behave like particles. So if somehow you could perform the double-slit experiment with tennis balls in an enlarged version, the same thing would happen if you could remove awareness or observation from the equation. If you think about it, this film shows us what would happen if you took a double-slit experiment and performed it with people instead of particles. Coherence is the double-slit experiment personified.
Hold on.
Well, that explains it.
So we're in the box.
What?
Well, we're the.
Okay, wait, so-
we're the cat. We're both alive and dead. So there are 2 separate realities, and
So what does this mean for multiple probable realities? The state of existing in all possible states at once is called an object's coherent superposition. The double-slit experiment shows us that a photon, or a particle of light, doesn't exist in one state or another, but in all of its possible states at once. It's only when we observe its state that a photon is essentially forced to choose one probability, and that's the state that we observe. The Copenhagen interpretation in quantum mechanics says that all of these other probabilities that we don't observe are collapsed when observation takes place. So the other probabilities just vanish. But I don't think that this is true. There's another theory, the many worlds interpretation. In this interpretation, Every time there's a probability that something differs in one certain timeline, it splits off into different timelines. So basically, there's a world for every probable thing that could ever happen, ever has happened, and ever will happen. Instead of the other probabilities collapsing, they exist. We're just not aware of them. Our awareness is only stuck in one probability. Time is mostly a human concept that helps us make sense of the world, but there's nothing to show that it's this objective thing that actually exists. All of the probable paths you could have ever taken or ever will take, they all exist right now, and you could think about all of these as a fractal. In this fractal, the probabilities branch off in an infinite amount of ways. Technically, your consciousness, your identity, your individuality is this fractal. This fractal is the whole of you. But the way our consciousness works in this world is that our awareness is passing through just one pathway of that fractal, presenting you with the illusion that you don't exist outside of the pathway that you're currently experiencing. Through the mechanisms of time and space, you get to experience one pathway. This brings us back to mirror matter in the comet. It seems obvious to me that the other probabilities that we're not aware of, they make up the mirror matter or the dark matter that's missing in our universe. We know it's there, our awareness just can't see it. So when the characters in the film see all of their other selves running around and causing all this chaos, these other probable realities always existed. They just didn't know about it. The comet brought these probabilities into their awareness. In his book, The Nature of Personal Reality, Seth says, "The path of experience is nowhere settled. There is no one road that does not have avenues to another. There are deep veins of probable actions ever available to you at any given time. Your imagination can be of great value, allowing you to open yourself to such courses. You can then use it to help you bring these into being. The present, as you think of it, is that point at which you select your physical experience from all those events that could be materialized." In this book, Seth repeatedly emphasizes that we have power in the now. In the present, we actually have power to choose which pathway we go down. We can bring forward the reality we want. When you're stuck in fearful thinking or negative thinking, which is always rooted in fear, then through those thoughts and beliefs, you attract more of the same into your life. In Coherence, the characters are constantly living in worlds that are based on fear. These fear-based worlds are manifested by how they all react and how they're all feeling. Mike used to be an alcoholic, and he's afraid of the version of himself that never got sober. It was Mike's focus on this fear that brought that fear into reality. Em was afraid that she would choose the wrong path. She was so afraid of making the wrong choice that she just decided to never choose. Lee was afraid she would be too much of a burden or bothersome to others, so she chose to exclude herself from the group. Beth's fear caused her to go down a dark path where she wasn't faithful to her husband because she assumed she'd be alone in the end anyway. Hugh was afraid that others would think he was crazy for seeing what he's seen. He's afraid no one will believe him. And they're all afraid that the comet is causing them all to go insane. They become paranoid and they stop trusting each other. All of these fears lead to decision-making that sends them down dark paths. The film symbolically shows fear-based decision points as the dark spots, which Em later compares to a roulette wheel. She realizes that the dark spots spit them out into other probable realities, where they interact with themselves in all of these negative ways. It's totally possible that the dark spots represent destructive interference. We're supposed to push ourselves to not only feel our feelings on their deepest levels, but to also be aware of our feelings. Having an awareness of our feelings allows us to have greater control over our decisions instead of allowing our feelings to dictate what we do. More often than not, however, we forget about this awareness of our fears and we allow our fears to control us. This is exactly what happens to the characters in the film. They're overtaken with emotion, they're overtaken with fear, and it dictates their timelines going forward. Fear, in many ways, is not a bad emotion, as long as we're aware of our fear and what's truly causing our fear. Once it's realized, we can let it go. I think this is one of the reasons why immersion therapy is often so successful. For Em, she had to experience the reality where her deepest fears came true before she could let it go and align with the reality where she doesn't let fear throw her into a fight, flight, or freeze scenario. So we do have the ability to choose in the present which path we go down, but there's a reason Em only came upon one timeline filled with love instead of fear. It is so much harder to be that kind of person. Fear is easy. It may be harder to pull yourself into the timeline where you're the best version of yourself that you can imagine, but it is so much more worth it to align yourself with who that person is. Near the end of the film, Em is sick of dealing with all of this chaos and fear and anger and hate. and she leaves the house to find her own path forward. She passes through the dark spots, finding other examples of dysfunction and chaos taking over the dinner party members. These dark spots all lead to outcomes filled with anger, misery, and hopelessness. In many of these, the character's fears come true. Eventually, Em moves out of the darkness, and it's like a beam of light is being shined down upon her. She looks up in wonder to see the comet. She decides to follow that path forward. She lets go of her fears and takes action. This is a reality where no one freaked out and let their fears get the best of them and lead them down dark paths when the comet passed. When the lights went out, they likely worked together, turned the generator on, and went back to dinner as planned. That's why they're still happily chatting away even after they're done with dinner. Unlike all of the other fear-based probabilities, this one is filled with light and laughter and love. Obviously, I thought the title of this movie was important. And other than the quantum physics definition for coherence, I saw that coherence means the property of unity, the union of one part with another, the union of every part with a whole. Coherence basically boils down to being harmonious. Just like in quantum physics, when there is coherence, there's constructive interference, and light shines brighter. So if we're made up of light, then we basically behave like a wave. Even though we're one point of consciousness, we have multiple probable realities. If you decide that you're in control of your pathway and how you interfere with your multiple probable selves, that interference could be constructive. Coherence of every version of yourself could form your higher self, or your oversoul, as Seth likes to put it. I think this could really boil down to what enlightenment means. Enlightenment could be literal. Em even refers to this in the movie.
Is it a good thing? It's like, it sounds like it would be a way to reach higher consciousness if we want to
Like an
go to
acceptance
that.
of ourselves?
Well, yeah, we always talk about meeting ourselves and finding ourselves, and here we have an opportunity to actually physically find ourselves.
So coherence itself could be thought of as higher consciousness. A higher consciousness where observation in the third dimension doesn't factor in, allowing us to be aware of all probabilities while observing it, breaking the paradox because those rules don't apply in the higher dimension. It's so interesting to see how all of these concepts are connected to one another. Spirituality, religion, quantum physics, light, darkness, fear, love, mirror matter. I like to think that the comet in some ways represents all of these things. Like the characters in the film, we feel drawn to what the comet represents. I mean, humanity has often looked up into the heavens, up to God, up to the universe, for answers to life's big questions. Answers to questions about the seemingly impossible. And maybe not even answers, just a sign. A sign that there is something more to life. There is more than meets the eye. It's like we can often feel that there is something more, and we know deep down that there is more. That's why I love this movie so much. It allows us to wonder, what if? What if there is more to our reality? What if reality does work in a way that we hadn't thought of before? And what if we hold way more power over our own fates than we ever realized? If you'd like to see more videos like this one, please consider giving the video a thumbs up and sharing with someone else you think might get something out of it. If you thought this was a bunch of new age hippie nonsense, I totally don't blame you. That makes sense. Please feel free to express how you feel by giving the video a thumbs down, and maybe leave a comment letting me know where I lost you. I don't want anyone to feel left behind while they're watching, and I certainly want to do all that I can to make sure that doesn't happen in future videos. And a tip would do wonders to make sure I can keep doing this full time. I have a Patreon that you could join, and there's also other links in the description below. With much love, until next time.